1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. In the chapter titled The Planes of Our Existence, which we are now studying, Sri Aurobindo has described the characteristics which distinguish the different planes and what makes for a particular plane of consciousness or a world. He has so far gone in depth on the physical world and its characteristics, not only its limitations, but in the very nature of its limitations, the evolutionary character of the physical world. That is, everything that is bound in it has to emerge. And then he moved to the vital world and described not only what the world is like, but then moved on to the relationship between the physical and the vital worlds. And this is in one paragraph summarizing all the key principles of the body of knowledge that today goes under the name of occultism. Because essentially, occultism is the body of knowledge that deals with the relationship of the physical world with the vital and the mental worlds. In concluding this, he points to a greater future science which will be liberated from the sole preoccupation of current science with the material world, and which will probably rediscover all of these principles and their applications. But we now come to the paragraph at hand, which we read only briefly last time, where he raises the question: if all this that we have so far seen is so great, so large, so overwhelming, and all this of the vital world is pressing down, it is behind us and always pressing upon us. And then he goes on to answer this question, but before answering it directly, he gives two other phenomena or two other issues related to this question, all of which have the same answer. So the structure goes like this: why are we not normally aware of all this? And second, for the same reason that we are not aware of the inner life of our neighbors. And again, for the same reason that we are not aware of our own inner subliminal layers. So he has basically described three phenomena. First, our relationship with the vital world that we are not aware of. Second, our relationship with those around us and the huge influence that impinges upon us from other people's minds, individuals and collective mind of humanity, of which also we are not conscious. And third, our own subconscious and or subliminal ranges, of which we are not conscious. And the answer to this, why are we not conscious of this? Why are we not conscious of that? Why are we not conscious of the other? The answer to these three is the same. It is because we use only our corporeal senses and are live wholly almost, we live wholly in the body, physical vitality and physical mind. And those things of that world do not connect to us through the body, physical vitality and physical mind. They connect to us through the subtle bodies, the vital body and the mental body. This is the structure of the paragraph. And now we are going to look at this in some more detail. The reason why I'm highlighting the structure is because, you see, Sri Aurobindo is writing from a consciousness that sees things on multiple scales and in large perspectives. The higher mind would see each paragraph of Sri Aurobindo's writing as a single thought or idea. And so we have to train ourselves to begin to see and understand the way he views things. And part of that is, or one of the results of that will be, we will see or we will understand things not only in the stream of writing as you read serially, but across these large structures. For example, if you read this serially, you would simply say, oh, he raised a question. Why are we not aware of what is behind us and pressing on us? It's because we use our physical senses, and the thing happens through the subtle bodies. Very simple structure. No, in fact, he has given you three questions, all of which have the same answer. And then you have to explore the connection of the first question to the answer, second question to the answer, third question to the answer. And then you see how the first question connects to the second question, connects to the third question. And then you have a still deeper insight. So, in the approach of our study, if we are clear of the structure of the thought itself, in the way Sri Aurobindo articulates and the way he is seeing it, you will find layers upon layers, not only of understanding, not only of knowledge, but actually of experience. So, this will be our approach in the paragraph that we are now taking. And obviously, it will take a little while because we will look at every sentence now in some depth, pausing at each word that he uses to understand why is he using this word and what are the implications of the usage of this word. Remember, Sri Aurobindo is a master of language, having a broad familiarity with a dozen languages and a mastery of at least 6 languages, which include among them ancient Greek and ancient Latin, and the Germanic languages, Teutonic languages, and even familiarity with the Irish language. He uses words with their root sense. And so every time he uses a word, you have to look at the nuance that comes from the root of the word itself. And then you will see not a single word is wasted. Each word is suggestive of an aspect of the idea, adding to a deeper understanding. So, first question he has raised, and we reread the sentence we read last time. But why then are we not normally aware of so much that is behind us and always pressing upon us? So, the so much was the previous paragraph. We saw from the vital worlds, things are pouring into the physical, and from the physical, returning to the vital. And everything in the physical world has its representative powers in the vital, and everything is connected and driven literally by the vital. And the vital literally forms the physical world from its own impulse to experience something of an otherness in circumstances which are further limited, and so on. So everything is deeply connected with the vital world. Why then are we not normally aware? And he uses the word normally. Because the fact is, we are aware, but in abnormal conditions. Or we are aware in circumstances where we least want to be, and things leak into us rather. So the abnormal circumstances typically are where our physical body is unbalanced, our physical vitality is unbalanced, or the physical mind is unbalanced, because this is where we live normally. Very narrow, limited band of consciousness and capacity. Every time these things get unbalanced, there's so much more that is around it and pressing upon it leaks through. Because, so to say, cracks form, or there's an instability here which allows the pressure of the outside to push through. Remember, all the rest is under you, pressing upon us. And it's so much bigger. What are the circumstances in which it gets unbalanced? One common example is when we have high fever, or biology functions are put in a condition where we are unable to remain in a normal band of awareness, and the body itself is unable to contain its normal protective thick layer of dullness. And so things begin to creep in. And it is in the state of high fever that you will say somebody is talking meaninglessly, or gets into a state where they cannot control what they want to say, or they seem to be in conversation with something or someone who is not there, or they may see images or forms, and you will say, the word medically slips my mind, hallucinating, but when the person is speaking abnormally, delirium, yes, that's the word. You're in delirium, they will say. And the moment the fever comes back to normal, the delirium goes away and the person has no memory of it. And that shows that the state of consciousness of the person was abnormal, not integrated with his normal range. But in that delirious state, all kinds of things pour through, chaotically generally, so it has no value. But in that pouring through, you get a glimpse of influences from there. In one case in the ashram, where a lady in high fever used to see images, forms, some of them outside the window. She was on the first floor, and from outside the window, she would see forms, and she would say sometimes they disturb her or they communicate with her. And this was reported to the mother, saying that she is hallucinating. And the mother said, no, they are not hallucinations. She's seeing things of the subtle world. In fact, if you think about it from the yogic perspective, there is no such thing as hallucination which is merely imaginary or unreal. All hallucinations, all experiences by anybody under an unbalanced condition, including when you lock up people because they have lost their balance of mind, all of them are seeing things which are real but not belonging to the physical world. They may be things of the vital world or the mental world, or they may be reflections of things created by their mind, but reflections in the vital or the mental world, but they're real in themselves. Even each time you picture an image in your mind, it has a reality in the mental world. It may be a reality that you create, an image that you create, but it has an independent form which somebody else who has the inner sight can actually see. So, for example, if you sit down and picture something and create a very detailed image in your mind, someone who has the clairvoyant sight of perception can actually describe what you're seeing. Interesting. You are actually creating an objective reality in, well, a subjective domain. But I mean objective because it has a life of its own and a reality of its own. And if you release it, well, it wanders around until it loses its own force of coagulation and dissipates. But if you give to it a certain force and intention, it can actually go around and try to execute the force which you have put into it. And this is how we are all the time creating ideas with our imagination, and often negative ideas, thinking, what if? And we create in detail a picture of a negative circumstance. We're actually creating an idea and releasing it into the atmosphere, which tries then to execute itself. So, pessimistic people tend to surround themselves with negative energies, negative ideas, forces which they have created, which then tend to actualize and turn their life precisely in a pessimistic direction, which justifies their pessimism, or vice versa for the optimistic people. And so, all of this is part of the realm of experience which pops into your consciousness when you're in that high fever state. The things which you created, which you're not aware of, but are hanging in you, in your aura, now seep into you and come out as images or impressions, etc. Other unbalanced conditions, for example, when you take hallucinogenic drugs, a similar thing happens. Briefly, cracks are formed in your normal frame of consciousness, and things which are just beyond begin to creep in. The problem with that is not only you perceive things, but they perceive you. And then you get into trouble because those beings says, here's somebody I can toy with, play with, or harass. The fact that you open a passage is always a two-way influence, and their influences can pursue you. And if they manage to get a hook into you, they don't want to let go. And although the passage may try to close when you come back to your normalcy, if the hook is formed, the connection is formed, or a crack is created, there's always a weak point, and an influence can keep going through. And some of these things can be quite sticky. So all of this is to say that we do have awareness of these things, but in abnormal conditions, not in normal conditions. And other abnormal conditions, which are normally created by people for this purpose, is to fast for a long duration. And the result of that is, because the body's normal balance of the physical vitality with the physical body has been now destabilized, in desperation, the body reaches out to access energy from the vital body. And the result is a gateway is opened, a passage is created, and you feel great because you have lots of energy. You don't need to eat, even the hunger stops for a while. And if you kept at it long enough, the physical body begins to shrivel up because it needs physical material. But you say, I don't feel hungry, I'm feeling lots of energy, I'm even stronger than before, but you're in an unbalanced state. You feel much lighter because you are much more aware of your subtle body. You feel you don't need to sleep, and bit by bit, the physical body is withering away because you have just been put into this unbalanced energetic condition. Of course, if you took trouble to consciously integrate the vital energy through the vital body with your physical biological processes, you could drastically reduce your food requirement, your sleep requirement, and so on. But it has to be done gradually in a way that the physical body adapts to the new rhythm. And this again opens to us some very interesting possibilities. It means, first of all, that our current relationship with the life force is the habit and balance the physical body has currently built up. You could have trained yourself from the beginning to build a different balance. And that's what makes often for a big difference between people. Here's somebody who has lots of energy, never gets tired, rarely needs to sleep. And here's somebody who's always tired, always depleted. Why? The balance of energy. A system such as the pranayama practices is precisely designed to rebuild this balance. And through a series of steps, if you follow them properly in sequence, in the way they are meant to be, you will find you shift this balance and a new harmony, a new rhythm is set in place. And it does not work if you skip steps. So they will ask you to do breathing, in breath, holding, out breath, holding, with certain patterns of numbers. And so they will say, this is how you begin, then you change to this, then you change to that, and then advanced practices. If you skip the first few and jump straight to the advanced practices, you won't get the same result. So there's a graded series of steps through which this harmony is being reshaped bit by bit. Now, all of this is to say that what we call normal is dull and limiting, but it's not bound. It can be modified, it can be widened. So we are not normally aware of so much that is behind us and pressing upon us because our normal is very small. We could have trained, and a future educational system might just train us to also develop, widen this band of normality and develop awareness of these things. But the second unusual phrasing he uses is, why are we not normally aware of so much that is behind us and pressing upon us? Why does he say behind us? Now, normally you would have just read this and gone through, not worrying about what it means, because instinctively we tend to place deeper things as if behind and more superficial things as if in front. So your experience, for example, when you go in deep concentration or meditation, is I go deep like this into me. And I come out is like this out from the inner. And in the experience, however deep it is, your surface parts feel in front and the deeper parts feel deeper within or behind. Why is that? You could say simply, that's how we are habituated to thinking about it. No, there's a deeper truth, the deeper reason. And it's worth exploring this because, again, it has massive implications. The experience of front and behind, or even the experience of higher states of consciousness being above head, not below, has a deep foundation. You could similarly have asked, higher consciousness, shouldn't it be everywhere? And if it is above your head, then if I climb up one step, will I be closer to my higher consciousness? Or if somebody is on the floor above you, is his lower consciousness touching your higher consciousness? It's not in physical space. It's not in physical space that the higher is above or lower, it is in the subtle body. And the subtle body is not in physical space, it is in subtle space. And so the front and back also belongs to the subtle space. And so let's explore this a little bit. You have a front in the physical body because all of your physical senses are as if tuned in forward. Your eyes are in front, your nose is in front, your ears also are slightly turned to register things in front. In fact, the cause of this is in the vital body. But so physically, we have a front and we have a back, and then we have sides. And then we have an up and down also because of physical gravity. If you were in space floating, tumbling inside a little spaceship, there would be no up and down. Or you could nominally say the sun is your up or down, depending on what you choose, but it would have no meaning essentially. But being on earth, you have an up and down also. So the front is because all of our consciousness senses are turned towards this part, and then our biology of hands and legs is designed to move forward to where the senses are directed. But the cause of it, if you go into the vital body, you'll find the cause is very interesting. Let's say now you put yourself in your vital body, and we'll describe what it's like first. First of all, you notice your sight is not bound to the physical eyes. So, physical eyes may close or open, makes no difference, you're still aware. Of what and in which direction? Interestingly, in the vital body, your awareness is in all directions because you're not dependent on the physical organs. It's sight and power of sight which is aware in all directions. From what? Through the whole body. And unlike the physical body, which is form bound, remember the description of the vital world, the vital body is energy bundle. Quality of consciousness, power of consciousness, energy of consciousness. And so it's as if you're aware in all directions at the same time. So where is your front? And all five senses are in all directions. Where is your front? So in vital terms, the front has not to do with physical space, but energetically, what is your front? The thing towards which you are moving, the thing you're about to do. And what is your back? The thing you have left behind, the thing which is dying out, which is no more relevant to you. Now you see, in the vital body, the experience of front and back has nothing to do with physical direction of space. It has to do with the energetic quality of something which is emergent and something which is dying out. Now you will recall, if you remember, we had studied many years ago on Sundays the description of the horse in the Upanishad, where the horse is moving forward, and it is the description of the divine energy moving forward in its manifestation. It's something like this. In the energy body, the forward movement is your fulfillment, execution, expression, moving forward in time towards your future. But it is not in physical space in direction. You unfold, that's your forward movement. Equally, up and down, again, has no physical meaning, but what is up for you purely energetically is the sense of rarefication, things becoming finer, more subtle, more awake. And down is things becoming dull and bound and limited, less conscious, less awake. Again, qualitatively, energetically. And now you see, in the vital body, front has a different meaning, back has a different meaning. What is side? When do you feel we are next to each other? We are together in this common purpose. And then you give to it a physical form, holding hands. When you are both facing the same purpose, same objective, with the same intention, you are aligned and you connect on the left and right. Interesting. So you are, what's the word he uses later on? Fellow men. You are as if close friends, you're bonded brothers, sisters, whatever form you give to it. But we are together in this. And the sense of togetherness is we are facing the same, aligned, joined on the side. What's the sense of left and right? Can you feel that energetically? There's a qualitative difference, but there's a sense of distinction between the two, a qualitative difference. We need not go into it now, but what you see here is all of these values are natural to the vital body, which then, when it projects itself into the physical body, they map themselves now in the world of form and not of energy. And so all these energetic qualities have now to be bound in form. So in form, this part has to become my front, that part has to become my back, this is up and down. But qualitatively, this is my feeling in the front. The front is what I'm moving towards, is what I'm creating. And the back is what I have left behind, where I'm less conscious, literally. And so the question which he has put here, why are we not normally aware of so much that is behind us? Now think of it in this sense. What the just that word phrasing, behind us. He could have said, why are we not aware of so much that is impact from the vital world? No, but he says behind us, because the sense of all of these deeper dimensions of our reality is as if from the back, from the behind, where it's all hidden, not in our frontal surface directed awareness, which is focused on my immediate reality and the action I have to do in the physical world. All that is behind, and from behind, secretly influencing me. So here the sense is not so much of the past is more the energetic losing, but it is the hidden behind of which we are not conscious. Subconscious, subliminal. So Sri Aurobindo uses subliminal generally in a different sense. Subconscious is where we are not conscious. That would be down. As you go down in the physical consciousness, in the vital body, actually downward, more dull, less conscious. But subliminal is more behind the limb, behind the lit up frontal part. And he makes it a point to say that these layers behind are not subconscious or unconscious. They are conscious, they are even more conscious, although of the same grade, but on a deeper and wider level. And there's a gap between the two. But they are conscious in the vital body. So much that is behind us, the whole sense of connection with the vital world or the mental world and all the rest is experienced as an opening out into inner and therefore behind ranges. And that's what happens when you concentrate to go within. You are going into the deeper inner layers. And where is the psychic being located in all this? Somewhere deep, 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 deep. And you want to point as if at the back, but it's kind of silly to say it's behind your body. So it's here, but it's deep inside, and you don't know how to map it. Because the sense of depth inward is not in terms of physical space, it is in terms of qualitative change of consciousness, change of energy quality. The deeper you go, the more rarefied, the more essential, less bound to form, until as you reach the psychic, you are literally free of form in the most essential quality of consciousness. And because you are free of form in the essential quality, equally, if you enter through the mind or through the vital or through the physical, you end up in the same psychic essentiality. And that's why Sri Aurobindo describes the psychic not as a plane in the vertical ascension, but as a backdrop supporting. And the same would be true equally of the self. Where is the self? Well, from wherever you are, you can open out to its universality. And yet, the sense of the experience, when you are in your surface, normal thinking mind, I am here, and the self is felt either as surrounding me, enveloping me, but the full power of it is as if in a backdrop, supporting from behind, putting its influence from behind. This is generally how one tends to register things, precisely because our inner layers are felt as if in the depths behind. So, all this is to point out the importance of this phrasing, so much that is behind us. In the first sense of opening to this subtle body or its influence, one begins to feel it emerging from behind, popping up from within. Similarly, the first sense of opening to the intuitive or higher ranges is a sense of something above which pops down, drops down. Because again, in the subtle body, higher ranges are mapped vertically upward because it's not form, it is quality of consciousness. So, and so much that is behind us and always pressing upon us. Where is the sense of pressing? Do you feel the pressure? No. But again, in terms of the vital energy, it is in the vital body that the pressure is there, that you experience from behind things always as if drifting forward, influences emergent to the surface. The analogy would be wonderful if you could somehow flip this and make it, let's say, a pool of water, and surface is your surface consciousness, and you go down the layers, and from below little bubbles bloop 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 come up and pop up on the surface. If you could see the origin of the bubble deep down, you could say, well, a couple of weeks down this person is going to have a bubble pop. Interesting. What does that bubble mean energetically? You can actually describe, or you can see where it's heading, or you can initiate a different energy in between to modify, redirect, intervene on those levels before they pop on the surface. There could be illnesses, there could be shifts of energy, new rhythms, new initiations, whatever it is. You look at a person and you can say, internally there is some deep shifting that is taking place, equivalent to a seismic shift, as if an earthquake, a sudden sharp change of consciousness preparing, building, and that's going to ripple out. A couple of weeks down, a couple of months down, the person is going to undergo some radical either crisis or shift. One can sense these things and one can see where they are going, but they always push forward. Now, in the physical body, when these truths are represented, they are bound in form. So it takes the form in the physical body that all growth of the physical body, all energy which is regenerating, building new cells, and so on, goes from inside out. But in the body, because we have a bound form, inside out will be from the center outward. It's not even the physical spine, which is, of course, a major center of energy flow, but it's inside outward. And your core body temperature is the column, so to say, where everything is held in the pure energy flow of life energy from there building outward. If you look at the structure of your arms, let's say, the core is the bone. But the core is not even the bone, it's inside the bone in the bone marrow, where all the stem cells are held, where all the blood is generated, where all the new material is built up from there, spreading out into the rest of your body. So, everywhere you'll see in the design of the physical body, the inside out movement, and second movement, top down. Changes begin top down. Literally, thoughts, emotions, action, but also illnesses or imbalances tend to go or are perceived top down. And if there's a problem which is below, which rises, you're not noticing it until it hits a level of consciousness at the top, and then it as if catches up, top down. So, all of these you will see representing in physical form truths which are natural to the vital body. And if you dwell upon this, it's a very interesting discovery. You will realize how much of the physical body design and even its working is really a representation and limitation of form of the natural trends of the vital. And when you become conscious of it within you, you can manage those things in the vital. If you're conscious of your vital energy, you can shape, modify things there, and they ripple down into the physical body. So So much behind us and always pressing upon us. Literally, in the vital body, one has the sense of something pressing, emerging from behind, from depths, always going out. If you recall in Savitri, the poem, Sri Aurobindo describes how when Savitri is beginning to go deeper to find her soul, she meets these surges, crowds of beings, forms, powers of the soul, which are coming out, each carrying a message. I must do this, I must do that. And she sees this and she interrogates which is the way to the soul. And that image is very significant because that's literally how it comes from deep inside. Impulses, impressions, suggestions, ideas, drives, pushes, which are all growing outward. Not all of them reach all the way to the surface, but that's the way it is. The pressing upon us. Now you widen it to not just from within out, but the within opening out to universality. And as if from the whole universe, there are energies, powers, movements passing right through us on that inner level. But from that inner passage, some bits impact, push out, and pour out even. And that's where you have the universality which binds you on the vital level with everything else. So now with this backdrop, now let's look at the next question, though it's not placed as a question, more as a statement. He says, for the same reason that we are not aware of the inner life of our neighbor. So the first question was, why are we not aware of this universal vital world which is pressing on us? For the same reason that we are not aware of the life of our neighbor, of the inner life. So now it's narrowing down the scope from the full vital world to the vital life of people around us. And it's a little more, he says, although it exists as much as our own and is constantly exercising an occult influence upon us. And he adds, for a great part of our thoughts and feelings come into us from outside, from our fellow men, both from individuals and from the collective mind of humanity. So the picture he's giving us, now narrowing down from the wide world, infinite, vital, cosmic level, to humanity. And within humanity, our fellow men, both individual and collective mind of humanity. So again, we should pause at some of these keywords. What is this fellow men? Fellow men is people with whom we have similarity and affinity. And what suggestion that word throws is we receive much more from those with whom we have familiarity and similarity and affinity. So we are open to all these influences from all of humanity. From the mind of collective mind of humanity, all the thoughts are impacting. From individuals, thoughts are impacting. But sitting in a crowd where there are 100 people, which of these will impact you more? Those who are your fellow men, meaning those with whom you have greater affinity. And the affinities can be of many kinds. We have similar aspirations on a deeper level. We have similar ways of thinking. We have similar quality and type of energy, mold and imprint of temperament. And sometimes these things also reflect on the surface in the form of the body. Remember, physical body is only the last concretization in form of everything else in the vital, mental, and even the soul influence. And to the extent that those things are quite strong in formation, meaning they have become distinct in energy or thought or in soul aspiration, they impact the physical form also. So, one of the results, implications of this is if two people look similar, they have similar energetic types. Again, this has massive implications. It is the basis of a whole aspect of homeopathy. In homeopathy, they will describe, it's actually, homeopathy is about energies. That's not how they teach it, though. It's all about energies, and there are types of energies. So there is a particular type, for example, let's say it's called the calcarea carb, if I remember right. And that particular type is normally tall, has strong bones, has a certain types of energetic affinities, has certain types of thought patterns, certain types of emotional patterns, and even physical habits and biological processes. If you match your type exactly and open one of these books of homeopathy, if you get your type exactly, you read the description and you say, my God, this describes me so well. And in fact, you will find things there which you didn't notice. You say, yes, that's true. I never realized I actually think like this. Why? It's an energy type bundle. And it registers on the physical level in certain tendencies of form. So you can say the calcarea carb type is normally tall and has strong bones. That's how it is. Why? That's what we have observed. There's no logic to it. That's the bundle of energy type imprinting on the body. Now, that would mean two types who are calcarea carb will have a certain affinity of that energy. So they could form friendships more easily. What happens when you meet with people and you feel instant affinity of friendship? You have similarity of energy type or thought type. And you tend to pull each other because you feel the affinity. So let's say you're in a group of 100 people. Let's make it larger, 1,000 people. And you don't know nobody. You walk into the room and you start wandering. And naturally, you'll find after a while you coalesce into groups. And you will feel comfortable with a group. You watch them from far. Yes, this group interests me. And you go close to them. And then you discover that there's actually similarity and affinity. This happens, this natural affinity makes for an automatic, I will use the word sieving process. You know, when you have a sieve and you put stones or grains, those of a similar size, they just fall through. But there's a sieving process which creates these clusters. And there's a very interesting study that says that shows that on a first day in school or college, when you have entered a place, maybe it has hundreds or thousands of people, the seating arrangement, the people you sit with or next to as neighbors, often make for your long term friends throughout your college years. Now, it's not because I sat next to X that we became friends for the next few years. Rather, because I had affinity with X that I ended up sitting next to X. So that sieving effect of similarities attracting has already taken place as you walked into the room. Certain energies have already lined up. Remember, in the vital body, no form. So instantly we are in touch with all the energies of these bundles. Instantly we feel affinity with certain types in the vital body. Instantly that there's an affinity, there's a pull, which then registers into your physical body as walking in a particular direction. Now, all of this is happening in that layer where we are unconscious or subliminal. And as you walk, you feel a place comfortable and you settle there. You see a question which is often asked: why do dogs turn around 2 or 3 times and then sit on a patch? And if you watch them, particularly on the road, it's so weird. They'll find a location on the road which is bang in the middle, knowing full well that there are cars which are going to pass by, and yet that's their comfort place. But if on a large lawn, you'll find they catch a location. Why? Because they feel energetically drawn. Or try it yourself. Go to a place where there's large flat space. Go on the beach. Choose where you're going to sit and observe how the choice takes place. It's a very interesting exercise. Some places just you look at it and you don't feel comfortable. Some places you look and you feel comfortable, either here or there. Which of these, somehow this feels more comfortable. And then if you're conscious, you will notice your mind kicking in to justify. This is closer to that, or it's more clear, or it's away from people, whatever it is. Your mind is justifying, but the choice was not made by the thought, it was made by the attraction and the feel of the energy. Become conscious of it. More and more, you will notice so many of your decisions are made from the feel of it. Whether you like a person or not, the first point of contact of the energy, you decide. That's why the less you think, the more easily you can choose. And goes to the very heart of what is called today speed dating. And the idea behind that is you can go on a dozen dates, but most likely you will construct pictures or ideas or impressions to create a good impression. Of course, when you get married, all the good impressions fall and then you find yourself not quite comfortable. But in speed dating, you don't give the person time. You meet for exactly 1 minute and then you move on to the next. So they actually line up people across the table in a series, like an assembly line. You sit, hi, you have 1 minute to interact, move on to the next, 1 minute to interact. And because you're moving so fast, you don't have time to build up a pretense. And what is interesting is in speed dating, within the first 10 seconds, you already know whether you will like the person or not, whether you're compatible or not, or you get a sense of what kind the person is. And it's all being happening at the level of the vital and to some extent of the mental. But since primarily relationships of these types are based on vital affinities, that's your first point of contact. And you've walked through maybe speed dating in 60 minutes, 60 people, you already know, yeah, that one or that one. Between the two, this one is more comfortable, that one is less. It's done, it's obvious. But the same thing would happen if you were just wandering around casually in a group. The same selection process operates. Now, there are other implications to this. Remember, your energy bundle type is also reflected in physical appearance. So people will tend to be more compatible if they look similar. I don't know if you've noticed this. And it goes two ways. When a couple meets, you see certain elements of resemblance in their look or in their features, and you say, ah, yes, they match well. Or, let's say a couple has come together, whether they match or not, and they've been together and built up over the years a certain degree of harmony. They change form and begin to resemble each other. Interesting. So it works both ways. The affinity is reflected in the form, and through the form, you can make a rough match. Not always, it's a starting point. But the other way, as your internal energy state changes, your form also changes to reflect it more and more. Of course, it takes longer because the physical body takes longer to change. And you can see why this would be the basis of an attempt to create a science. I think it used to be called physiognomy, where they would look at parts of the head and shape or hands and try to describe personality, character, and so on. There's a basis to it, and you can see the basis is energetic. But if you could feel the energy directly, you can directly map out everything, not needing to go into details of these things. In fact, you could ask, how was such a science first formulated? Today, you could do it with artificial intelligence, take the photographs of a few million people, get the study of their personality types, and then put a neural network, deep learning, artificial intelligence on it, and it'll come up with affinities and patterns. And then it'll say this shape provides for this, that for. But why, we don't know. But they didn't do it that way in the old days. In the old days, it was somebody who had the direct perception and saw how this particular type, extremely practical, extremely grounded, fixed in the physical mind, tends to have hands which are square shaped. Square shaped hands make for people who are good workers, efficient, organized, structured, grounded. Whereas slender, longish palms make for artistic, sensitive, empathic types. Obvious, isn't it? If you think about it, to your spontaneous instinct, if you saw man, a hand which is square shaped, palm, and someone which is more tapered, it's obvious this one is more grounded, this one more sensitive. Why? The form represents that quality. And so, those who wrote out those original books of palmistry or many of these sciences basically had that deeper insight and articulated it. And if you have that deeper sensitivity, without reading those books, you can have the same knowledge. Because the book is only describing what is seen directly. Okay, so I looked at many of the implications of this very simple idea that you have in the vital body a certain energy bundle which shapes the physical form. Why did we come to this? Because we were speaking of fellow men. Affinities of two types of energy bundles or types of energy forms will tend to connect. And because you feel connection more easily with the same type, you receive impressions from them more easily also. So the impact upon you, you're in a crowd of 1,000, the impact upon you is strongest from those who are your type, weakest from those who are most distant energetically from you, with whom you have practically no affinity, no alignment. So you understand why Sri Aurobindo uses the word our fellow men. You see, the word fellow men is people with whom you're working together, who are colleagues, who are aligned to you or share in your alignment. So for a greater part of our thoughts and feelings come into us from outside, from our fellow men, both from individuals and from the collective mind of humanity. So when you have a strong imprint from the collective mind of humanity, it's from your fellow men that you get the strongest imprints first, and weakest from those who are least your fellow men. Again, this has fascinating implications. It means you have as if layers of influence, of type. So let's say we are in a community here in Oroville. Our fellow men, those who have similar affinity, their influence is impinging upon us, and our influence on them, most naturally. What does it mean? Within the collectivity of Oroville, there are clusters energetically of alignments. And within those subclusters, when somebody grows and changes, there is immediately a ripple effect on the others. We may never have met. You may have been living for the last 20 years in the same community, never having met because your community is large enough, and you're sitting at home most of the time doing your little work, but your interactions might be the most intense, most close. And someday when you meet, you will say, oh, how is it we have not met? But I feel I have known you for 20 years. Well, because that's the connection which was there. And if you're conscious on that level, you can actually, as if, reach out and say, there are 5 people. I have met 3 of them, but the other 2 I have not yet met. Interesting. Mother describes how she would work on the world situation like this. There's a very fascinating passage in Mother's agenda where she says that at night she goes into this high poise of consciousness, and then she senses, and she says it's difficult to describe because you don't have a vocabulary for that state where form is not rigid. And she says she senses these, and then she brings them together and makes connections and forms connections. It's like, she says, it's like putting numbers together, but it's not numbers. And so you get the feel of what she's trying to describe. Among numbers, there are affinities. 2, 4, 6, 8. You can see there's an affinity. Or clusters of numbers which have relationships, and they're complex relationships. 3, 4, and 12. You'll see there is, because they have common root, 3 into 4 makes for 12. Some connection between them. 12 and 24, it's a double, but also there's a 16 in between, less connected, but 12 and 24 have a stronger connection than 16. Can you feel that? If you have a relationship with numbers, you can see how their numerical relationships make for clusters and affinities. So she's trying to describe something like that. And it's a complex network because everything is connected with everything else. But these are more connected, those are less connected. These are more connected in this quality, those are more connected in that quality. And it's literally as if seeing a network of relationships in her consciousness, which is holding the whole of humanity together. And then she says she brings them together in alignments to initiate certain movements or events on earth, in their lives, in circumstances. Very interesting description. But you get a feel of what this is like. The affinities of our fellow men make for collectives like this, within Oroville, sub-collectives, and then let's widen out. Oroville is part of a larger town, city structure of Pondicherry, practically now joined. And so there are influences through those. Not much in common, perhaps, with people who don't have the same kind of affinity, but influences are there. And if there is in the collective consciousness of Pondicherry a shift, well, it will impact this community. and its subgroups. And then you go out to the wider India. But if you have come from a different country, you have strong connections to your relatives there, less to the space of India. And yet, being in a physical space, there's an influence of energy also, but your stronger energies are from the more distant physically locations. For the vital body, physical distance has no meaning. So, what is your network? And it's an interesting exercise you could do to consider who are the people or what are the subgroups within humanity, within Orwell, within whatever other criteria you have, with whom you have greatest affinity, that you feel as fellow men, not what you think, what you feel. What's interesting is a lot of this has biological connections. You say family. But you may just discover on a certain level you don't have affinity with your biological family. You have stronger affinity with a non biological family. And that's your real family, energetically at least. And if this is true of the energy body, of the vital body, it is equally true of the mental, where the value system is slightly different. It's not energetic pull, but way of looking, way of thinking, quality of mind. But it's equally true of the soul consciousness. And this is something even more fascinating. Mother speaks of certain years where groups of souls came together. And I believe she spoke of 1967 as one of those years where a group of souls came for her work. What is interesting is, I happened to be born in 1967. What is interesting is I found whenever I met somebody, and it so happened somehow the age was mentioned and it was 1967, I found a particular quality distinctly, which said, yes, this I recognize. And they may not be conscious at all of the connection with the mother or even of a spiritual component to their life, but they have it, that light, a very specific quality. Not everybody in 67 has it, but occasionally one comes across. And that leaves you with a suggestion that sometimes there are, let's say, soul families, if we may use the word, affinities of soul consciousness. And especially if you have worked for a common cause, shared a common aspiration, and perhaps met multiple times whenever these efforts were made for a spiritual awakening, well, it makes for a deeper connection, which of course transcends lives, personalities, vital natures or mental natures. And you may not find a vital affinity. You may not say, oh, I feel nice being with you, but you recognize that spark and you know that you're working together, even if you never meet again. And this is interesting to see with certain people. You say, for example, with certain politician who I met once in a certain context, I was invited for a program. I met the person and I saw the genuineness, the light within him. And I said to him, we have the same goal, but our ways are different. And I could see what he's aiming at is exactly the same thing. His ways through politics, my ways through a more yoga, psychological, whatever form it takes. But the goal was exactly the same. And maybe I never meet again, but I know, there's an alignment there. So the soul alignment need not reflect in vital alignments or mental alignments or even in physical circumstances, but it's interesting to see. So this phrasing which he uses, a great part of our thoughts and feelings come into us from outside, from our fellow men, both from individuals and from the collective mind of humanity. You see the nuances and implications of when you understand this sentence in its true light. We actually are part of such subgroups and collectivities and a complex network of it. This is how humanity evolves. If our evolution was based purely on external interactions and efforts made, there would be very little hope. The fact is, it is these deeper connections which make for the real movement of the collective evolution. So, across cultures, across civilizations, we have these resonances. And every time we grow in these fellow men whom we may never meet, you have a similar impact. We are receiving, but we are equally putting out, unaware. And so it brings to us the one more profound implication, to be conscious of what we are putting out. Are we, I use this phrase, we're so concerned about physical pollution. Are we conscious of the emotional pollution and thought pollution that we put out? And the impact, most intensely, our fellow men, and of course our community, and eventually all of humanity. But can we change what we put out? Can we choose? At least start by being conscious. So we have gone in some depth on the implications, but the key point here was the same reason we are not aware of the inner life of our neighbor and the influences beyond. And now we come to the third question, which is also made as a statement. And for the same reason that we are not aware of the greater part of our own being, which is subconscious or subliminal to our waking mind, and is always influencing and in an occult manner determining our surface existence. You see, now the third point is focusing on you individually. The first question was relating to the impact of the vital world upon us and the huge pressure it brings. The second question statement was about the connection with our fellow beings and their influence on us, thoughts and emotions. And the third question is about our own inner parts, from where also there's this huge influence pouring in. And the answer to all three, why are we not conscious of this, this, and this, is exactly the same. But now you see the connection across these three. The vital world impacting you, the communities of your fellow men and all of humanity impacting you, and then within you, your own subliminal and subconscious ranges impacting you. And the connection you see across the three, something very interesting. It means literally that we have an identity on multiple levels, on those inner levels. Each of these, let's say, communities of fellow men has as if a shared subliminal part or a subconscious part, because we are aligned. And things come up in the group influence, things come up in the individual influence. There's a very physical measure of this, which is ongoing as an experiment, which I've mentioned many times before, but in summary, I can share here. It's called the Global Consciousness Project, where there are little devices measuring vibrations of atoms all over the world, 60 or 70 measuring instruments. And what it finds is the vibrations of atoms, which are normally random, when coalesced into one stream, make for a stream which is less random or more random. And whenever human beings are aligned in similar thought or feeling, the randomness becomes less, of physical atoms vibrating in the physical world. And you are actually measuring states of collective alignment by measuring physical atoms. And what happens, for example, when there is a global event, everybody is watching at the same time World Cup football, and everyone's on the edge of the seat. At the moment when someone is about to shoot, this alignment of energy, interest, thought, emotion is registered as a spike. That is, all the atoms vibrating on earth become more aligned because humanity is more aligned in thought and feelings. We are impacting the physical vibrations of atoms right now in the space where we are aligned in thought and feeling. And this is something so extraordinary, and it lasts only as long as this alignment is there. People, the ball is shot, missed, and the alignment drops. On New Year's Eve, the 10 seconds before, you see the wave rippling across the earth. People aligned next time zone and the next time zone. And what this again means is, on a collective level, we have affinities and there are influences and impacts on the vital, on the mental, even on spiritual levels, if we are more open to that. And this is what often makes for waves and ages and cycles. If there is a large, let's say, rhythm of energetic shift in the cosmic working, it reflects in human behavior. I think I mentioned last time how the solar flares are mapped with human behavior. And this is, yes, I mentioned it last time, fascinating graph mapping solar flares every 11 years, peaking, falling, and sometimes higher peaks, lower peaks, sometimes sharp slope rising, sometimes gradual slope rising. And you map it to human conflict. Perfect match. If the solar flare has a slow slope, human conflict has a slow slope. Solar flare peaks, human conflict peaks. Solar flare drops, human conflict drops. Perfect match. Literally two patterns. And this is one example. A solar flare is a physical representation of an energetic change in the sun, which is, of course, influencing all of Earth. But within the Earth, there are sub processes tied to sometimes regions. If you go to a certain area where there's an earthquake pressure building up, the quartz in the rock is under stress. It actually creates electric fields. But it's not the electric fields, it's the energetic shift which makes for change in people's behavior. Where underlying physical earth puts out from below. And remember, it's in to out movement. So even for the earth, it's an in to out movement. Energy streams which come up like plumes of volcanoes. The physical volcanic eruption is just a physical process of a subtler energy process erupting. But you can have an energy eruption with no physical eruption. You don't have to have magma follow each time. But where there's an energy emerging, a particular patch of land has a quality of energy which rises. And people living there will be always carried or supported by that energy. Or people of a similar type who seek that energy will tend to accumulate and be attracted to that region. They come into that sphere and its influence changes their thoughts and feelings. They move out of that sphere and something of it is lost. Interesting. And this will make for characteristics which otherwise you cannot explain. You go to different cities and you say, the same people shifting cities, they change mood, they change behavior. Why? Because there's this collective consciousness. So, first, there was already a certain quality of energy emergent, people were attracted there, but then the people living there made for their own special bubble and energy identity and individuality. So, we are actually sharing on multiple levels not only these connections, but also the shared collective subliminal or subconscious identities which hold us or influence us. So, when you look at it on these three levels, you realize in the vital world, there are worlds of each of these qualities of consciousness which represent in collectivities as groups of energetic qualities representing a world, and also individually you have alignments and affinities, and within you are also those islands or energy bundles, types of worlds influences. A being who comes from the vital world to take birth on earth, not a normal evolutionary being, will be connected to his world, his source, which is his home. Or if a soul has a particular affinity in its mission, in its work, or at least for this life, with a particular grade of consciousness. Let's say a soul wants to manifest music and wants to align to music from the, let's say, angelic realms. Gandharva, we will say, in the Indian tradition. The beings of music and their worlds are as if closer to you, or from you there is an opening to that. And then there are individuals on earth who have similar opening to that. And then all these individuals are aligned here in their fellowship or through their affinity to that same angelic domain. And if somebody has an affinity or wants to develop the musical side, which is of a different grade, more crude or coarse, not the angelic domain, more vital, more exciting, well, they form connections there. And they become instruments for beings or influences from that world. And so the angelic realm is influencing these, the vital, let's say, lower vital ranges are influencing those. When they meet on the physical world, in any interaction, they are literally playing out the struggle or conflict between those two domains of the vital world. You see what that means? Literally, it means our physical events, affinities, conflicts, unfoldment of circumstances, and their complex interplay are a representation in physical form of things already happening on those levels. And if there are beings which are particularly aligned or to which you are aligned, then their conflict will represent here in your human conflict. Something of this you see in many of the mythological stories, where in the Greek mythologies you have certain deities aligning with certain individuals or kings, and then the deities struggle up there, which may be almost like a sport, is here reflected in a gigantic war. But when you see it literally, it seems a bit of an exaggeration. But when you see this deeper aspect of it, you can see how well that's the reality of it, whether you're conscious or not. And so the question you could ask, which domains are you most aligned to? Think about it for a while. And it's an interesting exercise to go deep into this. And ask yourself which domains you would want to be aligned to. I had a very interesting experience. This time I was in the US on the West Coast. I was passing through a particular region and suddenly I felt a thrill of connection. And then I looked to see what are the things there. I looked on the map. It was fascinating. It was in a space which was university, technology, high technology things. And I said to myself, on this particular grade where I feel that thrill, that's where I'm connected. This is where there are people of that particular type. And so I feel attracted there. And I asked myself, if I did not have a spiritual life, if I lived by these values, I would be working here or living here, if nothing else. But then the part of me, which is the spiritual aspiration, finds a deep satisfaction in a very different space, in a very different quality of consciousness. And I see a part of me lives in this, part of me in this, part of me in others, and their physical locations or communities or affinities of each of these. Which is the stronger, which is the priority, at least for this life? Well, this is clear. And if this is clear, and if I have to sacrifice the other things, so be it. But if I could satisfy all those affinities, even more wonderful. And if I began to work to do that, I would be creating in my little community a little patch where that quality of consciousness is organized. You can see how that works. And people with similar affinities would tend to get attracted for that kind of work. So the question to ask for yourself is, among all the affinities you have, which is your priority? Which do you want your priority? Where do you want to put the most energy? Which do you want to build and deepen? And the one answer from a purely spiritual objective is to put yourself entirely in relation with the source of it all, with the Divine Mother, who includes all these aspects in her. And if through each of these parts of you, you align to her, within her all these are present, within her they are all harmonized as aspects of a single oneness. And what it would do is within you, it would bring these different parts or facets in alignment. But if you align them to these different domains of intermediate, vital, mental, and other realms, they would always remain somehow disparate. They would never be fully integrated. So these are some implications when we look at the whole picture from the three questions and go across the three questions to see their connection. So you can see how the same text we have read which would be very simple. He's just raising a few questions, and informationally, you could stop with the superficiality of it. When you go deeper, there are layers, 2, 3, 4 layers, and the implications of each are so great. When Sri Aurobindo wrote in the previous paragraph that all these superstitions had yet behind them a truth which a future science, delivered from its sole preoccupation with the material world, may rediscover. Reading text like this, at one time when I was a student, I would say, but why isn't Sri Aurobindo sharing with us? What is that future science? It would be so wonderful. And now I look at it and I say, okay, he's done it already. It's all there. We just have to see it now differently. And this is you see the implications of half a paragraph that we have read. And it has so much that he carries. But you have to then take time to think about why he says this and what are the implications. Now he's going to answer all three questions with a single answer. It is because we use normally, again, we'll think of why it is normal, only our corporeal senses and live almost wholly in the body and the physical vitality and the physical mind. And it is not directly through these that the life world enters into relations with us. And then he discusses what are the actual means by which the life world enters in relations with us. What are the powers belonging to those layers where we connect to the life world and the mind world? But all of which we will see later. Right now, we just take this one sentence and we see what are the numerous implications of this. First, he says, we use normally only our corporeal senses and live almost wholly in the body, physical vitality, and physical mind. So, broadly, there are two things. We use corporeal senses and we live in body, physical vitality, physical mind. Now, corporeal senses and where we live, they're two different things. Both can change. And they're different processes, different experiences. But these are the two things which make for the one reason why we are not conscious of all that. So, it is because we use normally only our corporeal senses. Why is it normally only corporeal senses? When is it abnormal that we don't use corporeal senses? So, again, going back to the earlier example, when that lady in high fever saw, but she saw with physical eyes. Or was it physical? Or was it subtle eyes plugged into the physical? We can't be quite sure. But often this happens that we see with physical sight something which is not physically present. And it can be that the subtle sight is activated, but it overlays on the physical. Or it can be that the physical sight is opening to its own subtler parts, not fully awakened in the subtle sight, because the physical sight also has ranges which go a little beyond. So, for example, a very simple exercise that you could do is to look at somebody with a backdrop of a flat white or gray wall or against the blue sky, and you look at the person and look at the edge around the head, and you'll see like a haze about an inch wide where somehow the air feels brighter or clearer or as if there's a haze around. I think all of us have had that thing. You've noticed it. Look at trees as they swing in the air against the blue sky, you'll see a haze around it. Now you're seeing with your physical sight, but the boundary of the physical sight is going beyond the physical light to perceive something which is of a subtler grade, of a subtle physical nature. And then if you keep working on it, if you keep paying attention to it, this faculty begins to develop more. Until a situation will come, and if you persist, and it will not take you more than a few days, but you persist every day, all the time, to notice. In a few days, you will find the quantum of what you perceive is much greater, much richer, more deep. And the quality of perception shifts, less sight centered and more even as if felt in contact. So you see the haze, but you feel the density of it as if you're touching it. And that's when you're beginning to open to the subtle sight, but through the physical instruments. So when he's saying this, normally we see only here, it's because our mind is fixated on the normal boundary of the physical sight only. And so we amplify that, we ignore this subtler expansion beyond it. Or if as children we did see it, as we grow older, often the environmental influence teaches us to ignore that and close it. And so we dull our perception to the physical thing only. In fact, what really happens is, in even with your physical sight, reflections or perceptions of the vital and mental body are activated. So you look at a person, you already feel something of their emotions and a quality of their mind or their thought. So somebody is speaking, and you can actually glimpse the light of clarity of thought. But you ignore all this. Oh, it's my imagination, it's my interpretation, because you've been taught that this is your thinking, your brain working, your mind is giving a meaning to it. It's your construction. And so you tend to discount it already. That's the education. If you had grown up in a culture where every day people spoke of beings, presences, influences, and literally as if it's part of your normal life. Oh, here, this volcano, that is the great spirit of the volcano. Today is happy, today he's calm, tomorrow he's upset. You begin to perceive the mood of that consciousness or that being or that presence because it's normal. And then on your own, you look at the volcano, you can say, tomorrow is going to erupt. He's getting a little edgy now. Why? Because you paid attention to it and the capacity developed. If from childhood you were told, oh, notice this guy's aura is a bit disturbed, there's a lot of agitation in his energy, you begin to notice, you begin to give it importance, and then you weave it into your normal life, thinking, feeling, interaction. And as a result, it grows. So, first suggestion here is start doing this, start observing, start noticing, but recognize what you're perceiving. Okay, because you have been brought up with such a mixed or confused perception, some of your own expectations or ideas will tend to project. Mix in, but be vigilant. Let the impressions come without preconception. And if you've done the basic training of any yoga, learn to quiet your mind, quiet your emotions, remove personal attachment, desire, preferences, etc. Be like a quiet mirror in a poise of equality in the vital or mental or whatever, even in your physical consciousness, then the perception is much more clear. And you'll notice when you're mixed, it's a reflection of your own state. You notice that and you learn to discount it. And very quickly, it doesn't take much time, but it takes attention, it takes a little bit of effort, interest. Very quickly, one begins to sift out. And you can see how you can learn to distinguish the pure perception from the mixture. And then interesting things begin to happen. You perceive something for which you have no vocabulary, you have no equivalent because you have not experienced it. And then you say, I don't know how to describe it, but there's this strange thing. And then the person tells you an incident and you recognize, this is what it is. And now you have a perception which you will recognize in someone else. Or you have this thing and you say, this is familiar, I don't know what it is. And then a memory pops up of an experience you had of a similar quality and say, this is what it is. And then you ask them, is this what you had? And they confirm. Or they had an experience which is slightly different, and now you see why the difference was there. Literally, you are entering an experience of life for which you don't have a vocabulary. Because so far, most of your vocabulary was built on physical senses and physical world experiences. When these things become important, one would develop a vocabulary for it. It is said, I don't know how true it is, but there's some truth to it, that the Eskimos have 25 different terms for snow. So depending on the kind of snow, whether it's fine, whether it's hard, whether it's compact or soft or whatever it is, whether it's grown, whether it's fallen, 25 different terms. Why? Because it matters to them. That's their world. Whereas a farmer who's looking at the plant's health develops in his perception the sensitivity to distinguish 300 shades of green. He may not have words for it, but he says, this shade I know. This plant is beginning to it has not enough water, or it's beginning to catch some infection or some attack of a pest, or there's a problem with the roots, or this is lacking in a particular nutritional content, and he knows exactly what to do because he recognizes those shades. But it's not just the shade, he's also feeling the energy behind the shade. And the energy tells him much more. But the shade is what his surface mind recognizes as the link point for the energy. But he developed a sensitivity to distinguish 300 shades of green because he paid attention. So now let's see, what are we paying attention to? And how much it amplifies those things in our life. And when we start paying attention to these things, it's not such a big deal. So it is because we use normally, and you see the importance of the word normally, only our corporeal senses. Now, Mother has a very interesting discussion about this, where she says, you can extend the physical senses. And she uses the phrasing of I think she uses the word life energy, or the vital, nervous. She uses the phrase nervous. It's as if the nervous energy you're able to take further. So let's say you're listening to somebody, other people start talking, you are able to tune into that one person while so many other voices may be louder. Now the numbers grow, it becomes 1,000 people, and still you're able to tune into one voice. You listen to an orchestra, and if you are specially trained to play a particular instrument, you will be able to distinguish that instrument easily. Why? Because you trained, you paid attention. But now without that training, you can still enter into it and learn to distinguish. If you have a visual, it makes it very easy. Because now you can see the movement and associate it with the sound, and then you can pick it up, then you close your eyes and you can get into it. But then she says, you can extend it a much greater distance than the physical. So literally you extend the hearing, and it's as if your hearing goes outside the room and hear what's in the garden. And the same, she says, you can do with physical sight. But it's almost at a physical level, you're extending the nervous energy in the physical senses to go further. Interesting. You can feel. Have you ever had that? You see an object literally as if your finger is touching and feeling it. You can feel the softness of the object. You look at the cloud, literally you have the sense of feeling the softness of the cloud. But you can do that with physical things, even at a distance, feel what it's like. So these are all within the realm of our current capacity. And the fact that they are there means they are part of our future evolution, if we pay attention. But if we expose ourselves to the contrary influence, you're listening to hard metal every day, all your sensitivities are going to go. You will shrink, harden, numb yourself. If visually your environment is harsh, ugly, not enough beauty that you want to reach out to enjoy, you will shrink. And this is one of the things which I notice being in India, being in cities. There's so much ugliness, so much conflict, chaos, and coarse energy that your senses automatically tend to shrink. And I go in other spaces, in other countries where there is so much beauty and aesthetics, and your senses want to reach out. But I have 50 years of habit being in, maybe 30 years, last 30 years when it's become worse, or 20 years that it's become worse. And I have to make an effort to reach out. Instinctively, it pulls back. Okay, that's the habit now. But actually, your physical senses amplify in their capacity when energetically you put interest and push the nervous energy through your sight, through your hearing. And that's how the farmer develops the skill of 300 shades of green. How much is possible for our current physical senses to grow, to develop? Potentially, there's no limit. Of course, there's a point where they will cease to become purely physical, and more the nervous energy will begin to come into its own, and it will join with the senses of the subtle body. All the better. Now you have the physical senses and the subtle senses fully opened out and integrated. That will be the evolutionary way. You can, of course, skip that step and open out through your subtle body and develop those senses, but then you have to integrate them if you really want to bring it into your full evolutionary possibility. So, it is because we use normally only our corporeal senses, and the next aspect is live. And live almost wholly in the body and the physical vitality and the physical mind. Almost wholly. Why almost? Again, the same idea. In fact, parts of us do not live only in the physical body, but we're not conscious of it. And if we become conscious, we can again develop more and more of this capacity. We do live to some extent in the subtle physical and in the subtle body. And that's how we sense those things. When somebody enters the room and before you have looked at the person, you sense their agitation. Because we are there also. But we are so fixated in our physical consciousness that it's almost as if it's on the periphery of your vision, periphery of your perception, periphery of your reality, and somehow touches a little bit. And if you're not conscious, it's nudging you, but you don't notice. Afterwards, when you do notice, you realize, oh yes, I had a nudge, but I didn't pay attention. The intuition was nudging you, but only when the problem happened, you say, oh yes, I had a feeling, but I didn't notice when it was there because I could not distinguish between that and the rest of the clutter of my internal state. So, how do you change this condition of living almost entirely, almost wholly in the body, physical vitality, and physical mind? First step you do is become conscious. And second, you become quiet in what you're conscious. And when you're quiet, you become conscious of these deeper ranges within you. At least the part of them which is now influencing your physical body and your physical vitality and your physical mind. So, what is this physical vitality? Body, we understand. Physical vitality and physical mind, what does that mean? And the part of the answer is in the next sentence where he speaks of the subtle sheaths and the vital body and the mental body. But the part of the vital in which is in us, that blends into the physical body and the physical consciousness. That's your physical vital. Similarly, the part of our mind and the mental body which blends and joins with the physical body is our physical mind. And so we are living almost entirely in this body, physical vitality, and physical mind. So when you say I'm conscious and I'm thinking, that's your physical mind. But there is a part of your mind which is freer, wider, and often you are as if on the borderline of that when you are daydreaming. Your physical mind is almost wholly fixated in the physical senses. So when you live fully in the physical mind, you're only conscious of the things you see and touch, and anything else feels like unreal or dreamy or utopian, imagination, not concrete and therefore unreal. Such people have a grip in this physical space because their mind is well integrated and bound here. But they have to struggle to think of the future, to visualize, to conceive of things. So I'm building a house, let's say, and I put together the materials. Until I've put it together, I don't realize, oh my God, I forgot that one thing. When they started making the Matrimandir construction and design, it was one of those who does not live so much in the physical mind, who was more in the mental part, even a little unstable in the mind, drifting away from the body. You guys forgot something very important. You forgot where to put the wiring. And you're not going to put the wires outside, you have to put them inside, you have to conceal them. And the people said, oh, yeah, that's true, we didn't think about it. So it needs something which is not in the physical mind, which can project ahead into the future, or in the mental world, construct in all the details, recognize what is missing, put it there, and then inform the physical mind this is what you have to do. Engineers, if you want to be successful engineers, draftsmen, working with matter, cutting, shaping, physical matter, and the most hard steel, you have to have a strong physical mind to feel an affinity on that level. Whereas the designer, the architect has to be much more in the freer part of the mind. So we are not yet fully in the mind, but in this physical part of the mind, the part which is more free. It's drifting towards the freer part of the mind, the true inner mind. But it's not yet there. But it's at least free enough. Now, depending on your temperament, the mapping of which part of your, which layer of your consciousness is more developed and more integrated, you will naturally find an affinity for certain types of work and skill in certain types of work. So if you see a person who is very much in the physical mind and has a particular density of energy, you can say, this person will be excellent in working with stone. Or if you see somebody who loves to work with stone, you will recognize that density of energy. If you saw a child with that density of energy, you will say, this person will most likely work with stone. What form it will take, you can't say. But he'll find himself, when in the near stones, he'll feel, yes, I'm in my elements. So you will see how automatically a person slots himself into life to fit this particular mapping. But so what is this physical vitality and physical mind? Part of that which is plugged in here and developed here, but left to itself, it is identified with the body. It feels as if a product of the body. I am able to think when my body is energized. So I drink my cup of tea and my mind bounces up fresh, active, energetic. When I lose the kick of the drug, then my mind begins to become less active, less energized, more dull, more sluggish. But a person in whom the mind has been sufficiently separated from this identification with the physical body can will his mind into clarity just like that, not needing his teacup. And it's worth training yourself for that. And the same with the vitality. The vital boost that I got from a certain excitement or sort of from a certain attraction or some energetic space, it lasts only as long as you have that source that drops and you lose your boost. But someone in whom the vitality is sufficiently freed from the body identification can build himself into energy, but also shape the quality of energy. I can make myself optimistic or pessimistic, shift between states of energy, just as you can shift between thought and perspective of ideas. But we live almost whole in the body and physical vitality and physical mind. Bulk of humanity is there. And when you are in that, things of the spiritual feel abstract, far away, unreal. When you are in the spiritual state, that feels so full and so real and so concrete, but the body feels not so interesting. You fall back into your physical mind and suddenly you start doubting, oh, was that a real experience? Or was it my blood pressure? Or it was just my imagination? And you'll find Sri Aurobindo repeatedly referring to this term, physical mind, in his letters when people ask questions of doubt. And he says it's the physical mind which doubts because it doesn't have the experience. But when you have the experience, you're not in your physical mind. The part which has the experience is the physical mind. But the difference is that part is not integrated with your physical mind. So when you fall back by habit into your physical mind, that experience fades or feels unreal or imaginative. When you have the experience, it's so concrete, there's no doubt about it. We have to work to integrate. But also, it leaves you with a very important idea. As long as you live in the physical mind only, you can have the most profound experience. Sri Aurobindo says you can have an experience of Brahman consciousness and you won't notice it. You see what that means? You'll say, I think I was giddy for a while. And that's all, it stops there. Because that's all the physical mind will register by translating the experience into the body and the most dense part of the body that says, for a moment there, I felt as if I had lost my balance because there was this opening to something very wide. And I bring myself back. Okay, now I'm grounded. Oh, that was my imagination, obviously. Gone. You didn't register it. So it's even possible that on some deeper layer, there is a deep experience, you receive something, but here you have no registration. And so, critical part, if you want to really develop your spiritual life, is to be able to get free from this part of the physical mind, open to your own deeper parts of mind, awareness in the subtle body, and thereby be able to have not only access to these experiences in their fullness, but integrate them all the way to your most surface physical mind, that the physical mind is itself now transformed and shares in this experience. And when you've got it to that point, you never lose the experience. When you lose it, it's because the layer in which you're living is not integrated with that part where you have the experience. The experience is not gone, it just recedes. And if you put yourself in the interiorized state, you find it intact. You bring yourself back into physical mind, you find you have lost it. So, a critical part of the integral yoga is not only opening to these deeper and higher ranges, but integrating them in a continuum so that your most physical parts can now experience those states and thereby you can live in those states in full waking surface consciousness and activity. Very few people in humanity as it is currently have developed this continuity of integration. I spoke of the type, who works with stone, heavy metal, and then the type who's the architect. So we have people who have the imaginative part of the architect and then they can execute on this level, but there is a gap in between. They don't know how to translate what they've imagined into this. And so they're unable to translate. There was a person, I think his name was Alan. He was working in the Lake Estate. The mother had given him work there. And he had this peculiar tendency that he would have wonderful plans. And then he would start to build. And he would build halfway and he will say, no, something is wrong. He'll break it and start rebuilding. And again break and rebuild. And it was a waste of money. So mother received many complaints at a time when ashram didn't have enough money. And she said, don't worry, I know what he's doing. And she explained that his problem was that he had this power of conception. So he could create wonderful uh, possibilities, but he didn't know how to translate it into the physical part. If he had somebody who had that capacity, they would have formed a team. This man conceives, that man executes, perfectly aligned. And then maybe somebody else is needed who brings the resources. So mother actually said this in, I think it was in context of certain projects which were to develop for Auroville. She said, for any successful project, you need three people. Somebody who has the vision, somebody who can execute, and somebody who brings the resources, in this case, the money. And they need completely different skills and have very different types of temperament. So this type who can bring the money will be very poor in conceiving or be very poor in execution. The type who can execute may have poor conception or poor fundraising skills and so on. Very rarely you get somebody who has all three integrated. And that's part of our work. And if you are able to do that in this lifetime, to whatever extent, integrate these different parts of your consciousness and especially integrate them with the soul's aspiration, then that which is developed here is actually absorbed by the soul and carried into the next. And that's the soul's evolution, that it is carrying a capacity of consciousness, a power of consciousness, and an integration of consciousness into the next. personality. Otherwise, whatever you have developed is left to the evolution of the species. Now, you could say, I have developed at the age of 50, 60, 70 extraordinary capacity, skill, etc. Let's say with a musical skill. I'm not going to have children now. So, how will it get carried by the species? Right? To carry with the species, well, you have to give birth. You can't at that age, perhaps. Well, fortunately, we come to the previous discussion, the connection we have energetically and in mind with our fellow men. So the capacity you have developed is influencing that fellow type and giving them ease of that capacity. And you don't have to have physically children, and still you are able to assist in the species evolution. But there are different evolutions, species evolution and soul evolution. What you have developed here, if integrated with the soul in consciousness, will also carry with the soul and into the next life. Otherwise, you're dependent on the species, giving you a sufficiently conscious vessel or capable vessel. So, we are discussing what it means to live in the body, physical vitality, and physical mind, and from there, hopefully, to be able to live in something deeper. So, first part, as I said, was opening to that part within us. But the second part is to be able to literally step back from the physical surface consciousness and open to the inner directly. And this is what happens in states of deep meditation. Any interiorization of consciousness puts you more directly in the experience of the subtle body and its capacities, but then that has to be bridged with the physical in the most surface part. So there is this capacity from within your current consciousness to open out to the higher or deeper possibilities, and then there's this other possibility which is to directly enter into the subtle and from there awaken and bring these, and it results in a much more rapid awakening of possibilities. And this is the method used in the yoga. And there are many methods, many processes one can use for this. The exact process is irrelevant. The point is to open out to this deeper range of consciousness and bring it into the surface. Which level do you open to? Well, if you use methods such as starvation or drugs, then you will open at the level at which you are to something of the consciousness of that level. You don't really change in consciousness. You don't evolve. You don't grow. You stay in the status quo, but opening out to something wider, which is immediately lost when you come back to your normal. But if you stay in that long enough, then you lose your body, because that has been put in a state of instability, and maybe lose your mind. You lose your objectivity, and you're unable to function, and everything is lost. So that's not the best way. What is more useful is you deepen the consciousness by means which go deep and go high, open to a higher influence which brings its capacities and awakens and lifts everything, and is constantly integrating and taking you safely step by step. And that's the method of the yoga. So all of this is to lead to the final point in this sentence, that, and it is not directly through these, through the corporeal senses and the life of body, physical vitality and physical mind, and it is not directly through these that the life world enters into relations with us. And the next sentence is, it enters into relation through the subtle bodies. So the discussion of the subtle bodies we will take up next Friday. And we can pause here. Quick review. We saw 3 questions to Aurobindo posed. Why are we not conscious of the larger life world influencing us? Why are we not conscious of other people's inner life, which is also influencing us? Why are we not conscious of our own inner ranges, which are influencing us? And the answer to all these 3 is the same. We live normally in our corporeal senses and live wholly. We use normally our corporeal senses and live wholly in the body, physical, vital, and physical mind. And none of these have that access. Those influences are coming through the inner subtle bodies. And so the next question will be, how do they come in? What is the relationship of those subtle bodies to our physical body? and physical mind and physical life, and how can we awaken to those and bring that influence into our realm of normal awareness. So that will be next Friday. We can pause here with any questions or comments.
This phenomenon of solar flares, can you say physically and occult what it is? What is actually going on? And I think last time you mentioned that it was connected with the rise of crime. This time you
Yes.
said human
Conflict. Yes. Crime. Yes. Yes.
What science?
Yes, they included wars and crimes. So conflicts of all kinds. So what happens on the sun is not fully understood because our understanding of the sun is not yet complete. Our model given to us of the sun is like it's one gigantic nuclear bomb which is constantly exploding unendingly. Doesn't quite explain what we are observing on the sun. We see gigantic streaks of electricity going out in arcs and falling back on the sun. That's nothing to do with nuclear processes. They're electrical primarily. And the solar wind, which is released from the sun, is electrically charged. So there's a very different model of the sun, which is the electric model of the sun, which explains better how the sun functions. In any case, the point being, sunspots appear, that is, dark patches appear. We don't know why. We don't know what they are. But whenever they appear, there are gigantic flares from the sun which are bursting out, and with it, a strong solar wind which is pushed out. The wind of the solar substance is so intense that when it comes towards the Earth, it bends the magnetic field. It's electrically charged, it interacts with the Earth's magnetic field, which gets bent and literally creates like a extension at the back against the sun, and the part facing the sun, the magnetic field is pressed, which makes huge shifts in the Earth's electric and magnetic ambience, except we are not conscious of it. And the only physical representation of it is in the aurora borealis, which are lights we see near the north and south poles, where the interaction is very strong. But that's about it. Interestingly, it's worth sharing here, the strongest ever aurora borealis ever recorded was 1872, the year of Sri Aurobindo's birth, in February. Interesting. And it was so strong, it was seen almost all the way to the equator. So it was as if the sun at that point was in its most intense burst out. So we don't really know why it happens. All we know is that there's a patch and then there are these flares. Black patches form, they're called sunspots. And then sun becomes calm again, and then again it gets agitated and again becomes calm, and there's an 11-year cycle of these. So every 11 years this happens, and along with that agitated phase, the sun's magnetic field flips. North becomes south, south becomes north. Why? We don't know. If it was merely a nuclear ball exploding, it wouldn't behave like this. It is primarily electric, and that could give some explanation for this model. But why it switches, we still don't know. We don't know anything about the sun, by the way. And but that switching is associated with the ending of that cycle. I think your mic. And after that, again, the sun becomes calm. And then we see across some 300 years, there's a cycle where the flares become every 11 years more intense and then more dim. There's a 300-year cycle about. And within that, a sub-cycle. But that 300-year cycle is associated with something unusual. Whenever the sun is very intense in its flares, not only Earth's magnetic and electric fields change, but if you have long wires, it induces currents and it can blow up your electronics. But more interestingly, the Earth's weather changes. So when the sun flares a lot, Earth heats up more. But when sun flares slow down, Earth becomes cooler. And in this 300-year cycle, they call it a mini ice age. And I'm highlighting this because we are about to enter the next Sun solar minimum, it is called, and that lasts about 30 to 40 years. The last time it happened, they said all of northern Europe froze and the rivers froze. River Thames was completely frozen. That's recorded. And we are just about to enter, beginning this year, into that phase. We'll see. But what it shows you is the sun is somehow intimately connected with the earth, not only through weather, but through our psychology. Sun's mood changes our mood. And then there's an interesting suggestion which Edgar Casey offers in one of his readings. He says, human thought affects sunspots. So when we are agitated, the sun is agitated. Now, this is an interesting suggestion. I don't know. You remember the map I told you, the graph of sunspots and human activity? Maybe there's a two-way connection there also to be explored. But from an energetic perspective, it would make eminent sense. From the physical perspective, it doesn't make sense. Yes.
I wonder if it's an increase in the fusion. In other words, what's going on in the sun is fusion of atoms, no?
That's one theory. Like I said, that is a very superficial theory. There's much more happening which is electrical and not nuclear.
People or things stick together, things happen.
Yes, yes. Okay. So we are moving very slowly through the text, but I think it's so fascinating, it's worth going through it in detail. And also, you see, much of this is accessible to us. When you enter passages where he is describing the Satchidananda, well, there's not much which we can relate to directly, except by analogy. And so it's worth slowing down and going in depth with all the implications here. Also, with a very practical orientation, what we can do about it, what is possible for us to do. If you simply decide and take interest in becoming conscious of your nights, of your dream state, just that, just the intention to become conscious is enough to start the dreams becoming more vivid and more conscious and your memory developing. So all these possibilities which are implied in this text and which have been described even quite directly are meant for our discovery, are meant to be part of the slow evolution over time. But through yoga, in the accelerated evolution, we are meant to experience these things in our normal life. And we should work on them. So you see how Sri Aurobindo is giving us knowledge, not only of the physical domain, not only of the vital and mental, also in the next paragraph after, but even more of the spiritual, and all the vital and mental knowledge is intended to assist in the spiritual awakening and in the spiritual transformation of life. And if you think of it in those terms, all of this is so important.
read the number of the page.
This is a different
Synthesis.
edition, so you don't get the number, but you can see the
Chapter.
claims of our existence and last but one page.
Allora, sintesi, yoga,
Claims of our existence and 2 pages before the ending. Third paragraph from the last.
okay. You know something about the Enneagram? Enneagram. You know? You know? There is someone here in conditioning.